Hey everyone, my name is Chris Beeman and welcome to my DevCon talk. I'd like to talk about math anxiety isn't easy for everyone and that I'd like to look into math and technical anxiety within the workplace. Now, to start off a little bit about me, I am a Nebraska native and I've been at Cerner for 3.5 years. A majority of that time has been spent within scheduling, and as an intern, I also worked under CTS. As an undergrad, I studied computer science and mathematics. The computer science was to get a job in IT, and the mathematics was honestly just for the fun and love of it. Call me a nerd. And as a senior, I studied math anxiety during my undergraduate thesis, which kind of goes into the motivation of this talk. And there are three main quotes that I want to address here. The fact that math is confusing. You hear it all the time, you see it all the time. Perhaps you saw this on the internet where it was this somewhat simple math problem and people were getting different answers. Some people were adamant that the answer was 1. Other people were adamant that the answer is 16. Which is it? And which is correct? Well, it turns out both were correct, depending on how you solved the problem and how you learned your order of operations. Math is confusing. Another example is long division. Perhaps you learned it the same way I did it in 2003, where it was very straightforward, it was very algorithmic, and you had an answer at the end. Very straightforward. Nowadays, kids are doing like this box method with some addition. And I mean, yeah, it solves the problem at the end of the day, but it's just very different. And I really feel for you parents out there who are struggling with this with their kids. Another example that math is confusing is that it's literally used as a meme in pop culture. It is used as a sign of visual confusion for people. Next, math is scary. More or less to fit the theme of DevCon 2020, but math was scary as a kid. Sometimes you had a math test on Friday afternoon and you were just dreading that day. You were scared. You were scared for the math test. It's coming. It's coming. Another example of this is the Count from Sesame Street. He involved math, teaching kids counting and teaching kids the numbers. However, look at him. He is a vampire. He has bats flying around him. There was lightning. It was scary. He had this evil, maniacal laugh. It was terrifying as a child. Granted, nowadays, if you've watched this with your children, Sesame Street has definitely subdued the Count a little bit more. He is not nearly as terrifying as he was, but he still very much is a vampire. The last question is that math anxiety exists? And this kind of goes into when I told people about this DevCon talk, I said, whoa, I'm going to be doing this sweet DevCon talk about math anxiety. And I got a couple of responses being like, whoa, cool, that's awesome, dude. That's real? Math anxiety exists? And yeah, math anxiety does exist. It shares some foundations with technical anxiety, and I really want to address technical anxiety at a tech company such as Cerner. So we'll follow these questions throughout our talk today. What is math anxiety? What is technical anxiety? How can previous research be applied? Spoiler alert, some of the research is from me. And how can we create stronger teams and communicate more effectively within IT? Let's address the first question. What is math anxiety? Derek Hopko originally defined this as the feeling of tension that interferes with numbers and manipulation and solving problems. And this definition kind of has some misconceptions here, that math anxiety only affects academic situations. It only affects children. And math anxiety only exists because people don't like math. However, let's talk about the impact and manifestation in the real world outside of academia. And there are two very, very broad impacts here. And it could affect your working memory processes, and it could lower your self-confidence. Working memory processes kind of goes along with quick-fire calculations, such as tipping at a restaurant or on Grubhub, as all of us are ordering online these days. This could also lead into shorter attention spans, overlapping a little bit into ADD and ADHD, which in turn affects the timeliness. You could take more time to complete the same amount of work. Lower self-confidence. To start off, I really want to talk about some learning disabilities and other conditions that could affect math anxiety. First off is dyslexia and dyscalculia. So, for example, if you have 7 plus 6, you would generally think 13. However, you could have switched the operand around in your head and wrote down 1 and did subtraction instead. Similarly, instead of 8 times 2 equaling 4, you could have done, or 8 times 4 equaling 16, you could have done 8 divided by 2 equaling 4. Another one is synesthesia. Synesthesia is essentially the mixing of inputs. So synesthesia in a broad term is kind of like when you see people seeing music. They see it around them in sorts of colors. A specific type of synesthesia here is grapheme color synesthesia, where letters and numbers might have colors associated to them. So when you have a yellow number, adding a red number, your primary color knowledge here would think that you would get an orange number, right? But in all actuality, you end up with a yellow number, which is 7, and a red number 3 equaling a black and white number. It's kind of crazy how it could work, but it could lower your self-confidence because you see it that way and you don't understand how others don't see it the same way as you. This could leading to the fear of just generally not being good enough. On the right, you can see a legitimate second grade math test that I had. Thank you, Mom, for keeping this all those years. And I genuinely wish that I was better at math. Luckily, my spelling has gotten a little bit better as well, but we'll see. I did not suffer from this. However, there has been research that math anxiety has led to clinical depression in some. It is very much serious and is very much something that is real. To segue into technical anxiety, I do want to cover that there is overlap here. But we'll talk about what is technical anxiety. Technical anxiety, according to Barbara Feen, occurs in individuals when newly adapted or introduced technology causes frustration and tension because of difficulty or incompetence. Doing a quick side-by-side over here, you can see some parallels between these. First off, the fact that it's tension. Yeah, that's a very common theme among many anxiety disorders. However, it reigns true here. And math anxiety, as we said, the impact and manifestation is kind of working memory processes and lower self-confidence. And you could see that in the technical anxiety description with difficulty or incompetence. As a quick disclaimer, there are 2 main types of technical anxiety. Technology-induced anxiety versus technical anxiety. The first is mainly towards using technology. Technology-induced anxiety is, for example, when you go on the internet, say social media, and feel anxious as a result of it. Perhaps you keep comparing yourselves to those you see on Instagram, and you feel anxious towards yourself. Technical anxiety, on the other hand, is what we'll be focusing on today, which is feelings towards technology due to a lack of confidence and other factors such as the slowness that you might have in learning new technology. Let's talk about impact and manifestation in the real world. With technical anxiety, I'm sorry, but these are 2 very, very broad impacts here, which we have general feelings of tension towards technology, and we have the imposter syndrome. General feelings of tension, this could affect so many different ways. You could be getting easily overwhelmed with perhaps new projects, new technologies, extra large projects that you have to do very, very quickly. And that could lead into feeling towards inadequacy, that you aren't good enough. And that negative mindset could also affect your ability to actually perform and execute successfully. Those kind of thoughts kind of go into imposter syndrome as well. Imposter syndrome in general is when you feel like an imposter, that you don't actually belong where you are. And it kind of has this idea of what others, you believe that everyone knows that you know everything. However, that's not necessarily true. You may know a lot, but other people don't necessarily believe that you know everything in the world. Your knowledge overlaps and intertwines with everyone else's knowledge within Cerner. You know a lot still, but you need to embrace the fact that people don't shame you for not knowing everything. Let's take a different direction and look into how previous research can be applied here. And as I said, this research is by me. So during my undergraduate honors thesis, I learned and investigated into more math anxiety. More specifically, my title was Exploring Math Anxiety in English Language Learning Students. And the motivation for that was similar to the motivation as of today. It affects working memory processes, and it could lower your self-confidence around math. More specifically about the English language learning side is that English language learning has social issues. It has stigmas with it. Just as we saw earlier with math anxiety, it has social stigmas around math. So I wanted to compare the two. I wanted to also look into the effects of dual language programs. Perhaps learning multiple languages was easier for you to learn math. And I wanted to look into the language gaps, barriers, as people have language gaps and barriers with math. Because math has been seen research-wise as a second language. And since math and language both reside inside the working memory, perhaps if you had a good upbringing with English language learning, you might have also had a good upbringing with math. And I wanted to focus on the effects of anxiety with that. So to do this, I interviewed 8 different students from honestly across the world at the University of Nebraska and developed their math and English language learning stories. Several themes emerged throughout this, and they were primarily focused on teaching and peer development and peer involvement. So to share a couple direct quotes from the students. Ying said that her teacher pulled students aside and talked to them one-on-one to help them learn English. And as a student, she felt more confident and engaged. Ying also said that asking questions to her friend was significantly easier than asking the teacher. Tamasha said that her teacher took the time to make her understand how everything worked and helped her identify other problems. Now, this is the very abridged version of this research. However, to do a recap, the math and English language learning stories lined up. The English language learning stories were roughly equivalent to the math struggles. So if you had struggles learning English, you also seem to have struggles learning math, which could also go into the fact that math is indeed a second language. The core here, though, was that good teaching matters. The value of teaching reduced anxious behaviors around math and technology and helped increase confidence in the students. Why does this matter? Because this information could help us answer our last question. How can we create stronger teams and communicate more effectively within IT? And there are 4 key areas that I narrowed down here for us. Number 1, find the common ground. As Ying said, her teacher pulled the students aside and talked to them one-on-one to help them learn. It made her feel more confident and engaged, which is something we could do to our peers. When you go to initiate a conversation with someone that you may have not established this common ground, you need to start with this information, because you talk about this and then, say as an engineer, you go right into the most technical aspect of this issue, and it's just a little hectic. Perhaps the person you're talking to does not know computer science terms too well. They are still learning in their process. But you got to find that common ground here. And once you find that common ground, you can actually have a valuable communication here. And this example is not a dig on any kind of person at Cerner, because the requirement to work at Cerner for most positions is a bachelor's degree. And sometimes that varies quite greatly, because remember, the test analyst that you're talking to might have had a degree in psychology, and they could whip out a ton of psychology information right back at you that makes 0 sense to someone who has a computer science degree. We all have different experiences and different knowledge, and you need to find that common ground. And that kind of also goes within computer science. Say an associate lead software engineer says, you just graduated from college. How do you not know how to deploy Alpha services? Well, your newest software engineer did not learn that in school. So you need to find that common ground and teach what is necessary. Going into our second topic, embracing spike tasks and KTs. Ying said it too. Asking questions to her friend was significantly easier than asking the teacher. And I mean absolutely offense by what I'm about to say, but sometimes managers is scary. Sometimes it's a lot easier to talk to someone that is on your team that is not your manager. And that's okay. That is just fine. And as a manager and as a senior member on your team, you need to develop your team. You need to help teach one another. Embrace the time and invest the time to investigate your issue and help spread knowledge. And investing in the time kind of goes into our third point here, avoiding the actual word of sprint. And I know that that is an agile term, but Tamasha kind of said that her teacher took the time to help her understand how everything worked and help her identify other problems. And more specifically, let's think about the word sprint in general. You see people running, you see people swimming. Sprint is a very common term meaning very, very fast. Sprints have winners and losers. You should be exhausted by the time you're done with a sprint. That speed matters. If you didn't go your fastest, you didn't win. Instead, I'd like to introduce the idea of running a marathon. Marathons have pacers. Pacers go a fast pace. If you've ever run a marathon, they are holding a fast pace. But everyone is together. You're running a marathon. A pacer holds that fast pace, and you need to ensure that your team is technologically together along that marathon. Lastly, accept that math anxiety exists. I wouldn't have talked about this if it didn't matter. And this kind of goes into the idea that saying, just because I received my degree in computer science does not mean that I necessarily learn technology well. That can go with anyone or any member of your team. And I apologize in advance that this next slide is extremely cliched, but math anxiety exists. Any associate could have difficulties around technology, and that includes engineers, that includes any type of other role. And you need to embrace your differences. Embrace the fact that imposter syndrome does exist, but you need to know the truth of it, that you know a lot, and you can learn a lot from others. Let's recap what we've talked about today. Math anxiety and technical anxiety are two very overlapping terms here. Math anxiety very much affects your working memory processes and could lower your self-confidence. Technical anxiety could also lower your self-confidence by having general feelings of tension towards technology and that imposter syndrome we've talked about. The ways to communicate more effectively, we talked about is finding that common ground, knowing what another person knows so you can actually talk and make progress. Embracing spikes and KTs, teaching one another. Avoiding sprint because we are running a marathon. And accepting that math anxiety exists. So maybe next time you take a math test or next time one of your children takes a math test, you could be a bit more scary and be the Tyrannosaurus Rex. I think that's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I never studied paleontology, but we'll see. I want to talk about how the fact that math anxiety does exist and you need to embrace it. Math is fun and you need to tackle that math test like crazy. And perhaps next time you see this on Facebook or another similar problem, you could have fun with it. Embrace the fact that there are two, perhaps more answers to this question and that people are getting different answers through different methods. Lastly, I want to say thank you. I very much appreciate your feedback in this talk. Future Chris Beeman is actually in the chat right now, and I hope I'm embarrassing him hardcore right now. So thank you again. Hope you have a great day. Enjoy DevCon 2020.